with me today before we get too far along. And I do love the way that they framed this whole day. Right? We started off with an introduction to the management agenda. We talked about the modernization piece. We talked about the workforce piece. Now let's talk about that data accountability piece, right? And so, Joe, you're a perfect person to be able to talk about all of this. But before we get started, can you let everybody know who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm with the Bureau of Fiscal Service, which is a large organization within the U.S. Treasury. And I recently assumed a new role, partnering with the team that's responsible for USA Spending. So that is the website that is pushing out federal financial data to make it accessible and transparent, both for the purposes of helping government officials who want to better understand federal spending, as well as trying to make this information accessible and understandable to the public. Before then, I was in a very related role, so I have had the pleasure of being able to address two qualities that I've been passionate about in government for a long time: transparency and accountability, and we can talk a little bit about how they really are two sides of the same coin. My other hat is as the director of the Do Not Pay Business Center, which is an analytics group within Fiscal Service that is dedicated to helping federal agencies use data and analytics to identify payments that may be at risk for being in error or possibly vulnerable to fraud, waste, or abuse.
There's a lot to unpack there. We're gonna have a great conversation. Once again, though, I do tend to get in the zone, so if you have questions, jump up and down at any time, let us know, and we'll be happy to get those answered for you. So let's start off with where USA Spending is today. There's a lot that's been going on recently. It's got a new look, it's got some new widgets, it's got some new whistles. What's going on over there?
So we have a few things going on. Probably most of you are familiar with USA Spending. It really is all about letting users access information about federal financial spending in a way that works for them. And so we're really committed to user-centered design. And that's another thing that we could spend a little time talking about. But the way I think about USA Spending is that it's making all 2 terabytes now of federal financial data available to businesses, to other federal agencies. So if you want to get your hands on 2 terabytes of federal financial data and throw some code at it, you can. Maybe that's not all of us, though. So part of transparency for me, when I think about transparency in federal financial management, is about making sure that you're meeting the user where they are. So in addition to being able to get a hold of this raw data, USA Spending provides experiences for users. So if you're perhaps a veteran and you've heard about some new initiatives at the Department of Veterans Affairs, you don't really want to go downloading data, but you'd like to understand, what is some of the spending that goes on at Veterans Affairs? Where across the United States is this funding being used? What does it look like? You can go to USA Spending and find that particular agency and learn about their spending patterns. So we have these sort of facilitated experiences that allow you to do data exploration, and you don't have to know a single line of code. And then the last thing I wanted to mention about USA Spending in terms of where we are now, and this is sort of a recent development, we have a new part of USA Spending called the Data Lab. And this is where we're getting to share a little bit of the research and development that we're working on. And so in the Data Lab, what we've got going on is opportunities to pair up federal financial data with other kinds of data sources to help show use cases for how individuals, whether again you're a business, you're a program official trying to fulfill a certain kind of mission, how can you better leverage USA Spending data to really understand how to build a more effective and efficient program. And so, for example, one of the data stories, if you will, on the Spending Lab is about homelessness. And so we've identified programs across federal agencies that are contributing to addressing this challenge of homelessness. And we've overlaid that information with statistical information about where there are concentrations of homeless populations. So you can start to understand what kind of spending is going on in different areas. Is it about education? Is it about workforce training? Is it about providing housing? And so this helps you to hone in on this particular subject matter of homelessness and really understand how activity and spending is coming together to try to address homelessness. So I get really excited about that.
It is exciting. I encourage you, if you're any kind of data nerd, check out the Data Lab, because it really is a very cool set of visualizations that really help you get into the data quickly. And I want to touch on that for a second as well, because one of the things I find interesting about what you all did with the Data Lab is a lot of what's going on at USA Spending right now is under mandate, right? It's the Data Act says you have to do this. Not the Data Lab, not a lot of the ways that the tools that you all have built to help people get into it, you've done because why? You didn't have to.
Sure. So I think I'll take it back to this concept of transparency, and that transparency, if you think about transparency on some sort of maturity curve, maybe the first step is opening your data, pushing the data out there, allowing individuals, businesses, other federal agencies to leverage that data. So that's like the basic piece. But transparency is not just about opening your data. It's about helping users to understand what the data means. So the Data Lab and other parts of USA Spending are really about taking that next step on the transparency maturity curve. It's about helping users to engage with that data regardless of where your skill level is. And so for me, that piece about pushing it to try to develop these use cases in the Data Lab is really about achieving a really important level of government transparency around financial data.
For me, I feel like it's also kind of a personal accountability for Treasury and the government writ large, right? We can push the data out there and do what we're supposed to do, but by helping people actually understand what you're pushing out, I feel like that makes you you're taking that responsibility for being accountable. So, you talked about it before, as you do these transparency efforts, where does the accountability piece get wrapped into that?
Yeah. So accountability is really, I said this earlier, I really feel like that's the flip side of the coin of transparency. So, you could be doing a great job, you could be doing a lousy job, but if nobody knows, and if nobody can gain any insight into that, and if no one can see what you're doing, you're not really being accountable. And so making sure that data is understandable is a piece of accountability. A lot of times we think of accountability as reporting, and everybody thinks about reporting and data calls, and I think one of the great things about USA Spending is that this is constant information that's flowing. If you'll indulge me, maybe I can talk about the sort of other piece of accountability that Fiscal Service is really committed to. And so, if transparency is is a piece of accountability, it's about shining a light on what you're doing well, where you need to improve. Fiscal Service is also very, very committed to the concept of financial accountability and offers services to help agencies improve the integrity of their payments. And that's sort of, again, my other hat with the Do Not Pay Business Center. So in that line of work, this is all about sort of a different use case for data, if you will. It's about leveraging federal data to try to identify for agencies instances in which you may be making a payment to a recipient, whether it's an individual, whether it's a vendor, who's not meeting eligibility requirements of your particular program. So, for example, if you have a requirement in your program, maybe it's a healthcare program, and a healthcare provider has to be cannot be excluded from doing business with the federal government. Sometimes that's hard to find, and so we have tools available for agencies, and they're free, to help them track and evaluate the eligibility of their recipients of federal payments.
So as we talk about accountability and data specifically, as a data expert who works in this narrow part of that field as well, let's blow it out to more government-wide, so you can give some advice to the feds in the room and watching at their office or at home. I think most people can make the mental leap why data is important to accountability and transparency and all that. But how do you use data to hold yourself accountable as an agency? And how do you make sure that the data you're using, that you're not fooling yourself, that you're not p-hacking yourself into what you want to, fooling yourself into success?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like this is one of those challenging things of being in government is that on the one hand, you know, I feel like there's so many officials that are just absolutely committed to making government better. I think that's why we're here. I think that's why we all live in the crazy space of Washington, D.C., where traffic is a nightmare and where, you know, we're working long hours. It's because we all have this fundamental belief and passion.
You gotta want it.
Yeah, you got to want to make government better. And so, you know, using data to help understand and demonstrate when you're doing well and being honest and brave about talking about where you need to improve is a space that I think we increasingly need to get comfortable with. I do think that there's something about data that can neutralize that sting of when you're talking about, you know, where are our opportunities for improvement? You know, if you're talking about data, it's not about, it gives you a little bit of space from some of that sort of emotional sting of like, oh my gosh, is everybody going to think that my agency is doing this horrific job? No. I have identified that space where I have a clear opportunity to improve, and let me talk to you about what our agency's goals are to get there. And if you present that in terms of data, I think it shows a level of commitment and understanding to those challenges that can help people to feel confident and trust that you really are on that path. And there's something about using numbers and speaking from a position of power that data is your evidence that I think can really help to unblock things and allow you to move forward with your goals.
Yeah, and we've got more data than we've ever had before. As a citizen and reporter, you know, having access to the USA spending data is fantastic. To, you know, be able to dig into all that stuff. But it has changed the landscape for a lot of these things. Can you talk about, I think you call it Transparency 2.0? What's the next step in understanding what's really going on?
Sure. I think for Treasury, for OMB, for agencies, one of the sort of next evolutions is continuing to charge forward on data quality. And so, you know, there's no perfect data out there. That's why we have data scientists to help us work with data that is imperfect and yet can still give us deep insights. But data quality is something that we always have to work towards. So I think over the next year, what is going to be really an important fabric of USA spending is not only expanding some of those user stories, those use cases that you see on the Data Lab, but it's going to be continuing our deep partnerships with agencies to find opportunities for how we can continue to get more complete, to get more expansive, and to get better and better data over time.
And I assume easier access to that data as well for all of us?
You know, one of the questions that we always have to ask ourselves is, as part of user-centered design is, are the tools that we have right now on USA spending the ones that users continue to need over time? Or are our users' needs changing? So what changes do we need to make to the website to ensure that you can have the kind of access to that data that you really need?
Do we have any questions out here in the audience? One right over here. Yeah, that might come from.
I'm Peyton Robertson with NOAA's National Weather Service. So one of the pieces of the agenda is commercialization of data and then access of commercial data. So we as the National Weather Service provide free and open data to all of our commercial vendors, right, that use that information to develop products and services and make a profit. So the flip side of that is acquiring data from the private sector and then some of the issues you run into with privacy and reselling and that. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that quandary.
Yeah, that's a great one, and I'm familiar with NOAA's work. You've really been at the forefront of using data to really power economic development, so kudos. I don't think that there's any easy answer, and actually I'm going to, I'll steer my answer away from USA spending, because since this is all open data, that's probably not the space for data that would be sensitive in any way, shape, or form. But those issues of privacy come up regularly in the world of improper payments, and right now we have a complex set of laws, some of which were written in 1982. I don't know how many of you remember what computer you had in 1982. I had an Apple IIe. So these are laws that are really important. They're devoted to protecting agency privacy. individual privacy, the privacy of our citizens, to make sure that we are not in a situation of government overreach. And yet, we're in this new world of data where we know the power and the opportunity of joining various data sets together. And so we may need to take a fresh look at what is the right balance, and are there ways that we can structure a process that ensures things like independent oversight, making sure that there's a clear documented trail and approvals for how we're using data. And if we do that, can we also manage to use data in a way that reduces improper payments and that helps agencies really efficiently provide an experience to their payees that you have a lot of confidence that if the government is giving you a payment, it won't be a mistake and they're not going to ask for it back in a year. That is one of the downsides of improper payments, is that sometimes if there's an error, if there's an eligibility issue that the government hasn't detected, we have to ask for that payment back. And that is a really painful situation for a citizen. You know, that's not the experience you want to have with your government. And it doesn't help any of us to really accomplish our mission and to improve trust and faith in government. So finding a way that is a little bit more modern of using data for the forces of good, while also having a really robust system that protects citizen privacy, I think is one of those challenges that we really need to bring some really smart thinkers to the table to work with.
You have one more for the audience, or are you all going to let me have it? Yeah, one over here.
Operational excellence. Joe, one of the things I think that drives the usability of data is standards and people knowing whether or not they can use it to trend or analyze or baseline or compare. And I know McKinsey, for example, says there's something like $3 billion of value just in baselining the federal data. But when you get to performance, that becomes much harder. So how are you guys thinking about standards and extending standards beyond just the financial data elements, but to performance?
Wow, performance standards, I mean, that's huge. And one of the challenges there is that, how do you develop a performance standard that can perhaps allow some sort of comparison between the success of protecting vulnerable populations and the efficiency with which we're managing to pay vendors in a cost-effective way, just processing those payments. That's pretty tough stuff. I do think this is a challenge worth tackling, and I know that colleagues at OMB and our top leadership at Treasury are thinking about this. I do think we have a model. The schema that was developed to help standardize financial data through USA Spending, I think offers a way of moving towards performance standards, or at least a process, I should say, because the way that we engaged with agencies, the way that we continue to get feedback on those standards, the evolution of standards over time. It won't be easy, but this is maybe, I don't know if it's Transparency 2.0 or Transparency 3.0, but this is a space where I think there is a lot of energy about stepping into. So thank you for that question.
Excellent. And that's unfortunately going to be the end of our time here. Be sure to stick around because we've got another great conversation coming up about this new thing called shared services. I haven't heard about it before. But please, join me in thanking Joa for joining us today.
Thank you.